quiet welcome to PlotFall. Settle in as we gently explore the history of why you wouldn't survive a day in a medieval peasant's home. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now, find a comfortable position, perhaps dim the lights or turn on a soft fan for background noise. And let's ease into tonight's story together. No gentle chime from a distant phone rouses you. Instead, it's a cold so profound it feels less like a temperature, and more like a presence in the dim, cramped space. This chill, a silent invader, has crept through the thin wattle and daub walls of your family's hut. Walls that offer little more than a suggestion of shelter against the pre-dawn gloom. It's a damp, clinging cold that settles deep in your bones, a stark reminder that the sun is still hours from gracing the sky with even its faintest light. You lie still for a moment, nestled perhaps on a bed of straw, a rough woolen blanket pulled tight, if you're fortunate enough to have one. The darkness isn't just an absence of light, it's thick, almost tangible, broken only by the vague shapes of your sleeping family huddled nearby for warmth. Their soft, rhythmic breathing might be the only sound, a counterpoint to the sigh of the wind as it whispers, or sometimes groans, through the countless tiny gaps in your home's structure. There's no soft glow from a nightlight, no illuminated clock face, just an unbroken, inky black. The air you draw in is sharp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of the packed dirt floor beneath you, mingled with the lingering aroma of wood smoke from last night's meager fire, now long dead. Perhaps there's also the slightly acrid, musty smell of damp straw and unwashed bodies, a familiar perfume of medieval life. There's no switch to flick for instant brightness, no thermostat to nudge. There is only the cold, the dark, and the slowly dawning realization that another day of relentless toil is about to begin, whether you feel rested or not. The world outside is still asleep, but for you, the day has already declared its harsh terms. The world outside is still asleep, but for you, the day has already declared its harsh terms. And where did you spend the night, trying to gather the strength for this new dawn? Forget any notion of a soft mattress or plump pillows. Your bed, if you're fortunate enough to have one designated just for your family, is little more than a rough burlap sack. This sack isn't filled with downy feathers. Oh no, it's stuffed with straw. Straw that smells faintly earthy, perhaps a little damp and musty from the cottage air. Feel the prickle of it against your skin, even through your simple tunic. It's lumpy, uneven, shifting with every restless turn, never quite conforming to your weary body. And you are likely not alone in this humble nest. Space is a luxury rarely afforded, so expect to be pressed close against siblings, parents, or perhaps even a lodger if the cottage is particularly crowded. Their warmth might be a small comfort against the pervading chill, but their snores, their coughs, their tossing and turning are all part of your shared nocturnal soundscape. The straw rustles constantly, a dry, whispering commentary on your attempts at repose, each movement a reminder of its unyielding texture. Then, of course, there are the other occupants, the ones who don't pay rent, but certainly make their presence known. Fleas, lice, perhaps even the occasional adventurous beetle. Consider this straw-filled haven their home too, and you, their unwilling host. Their tiny, persistent bites are a familiar irritation, a constant, almost imperceptible torment that leaves you to scratch in your sleep, or wake with angry red welts that signal another night spent in their tireless company. Sleep in such conditions is less a peaceful oblivion and more a series of brief, troubled cessations of consciousness. A temporary retreat, punctuated by discomfort, before the inescapable demands of the new day pull you back to reality. And that reality arrives not with the jarring buzz of an alarm, nor the gentle glow of a phone screen, but with a symphony far more primal, far more insistent. There's no fumbling for a snooze button in this half-light, no burying your head under a feather pillow for just 5 more minutes of blissful ignorance. Those luxuries are dreams for another millennium. Here, the day announces itself with an orchestra of the earth, a chorus that has echoed through these valleys for centuries, and it demands your immediate attention. First, perhaps, it's the scratchy, indignant crow of a rooster. perched somewhere nearby, his voice surprisingly powerful in the still, pre-dawn air. Then, a cacophony joins in, the snuffling and grunting of pigs in their sty. A chorus of insistent moos from the communal byre as cows begin to stir, their udders heavy. The distant, plaintive bleating of sheep might drift in on the breeze, or the sharp bark of a neighbor's dog, already alert. These are not the distant, muffled hums of city traffic. These are immediate, organic, and utterly unignorable sounds, seeping through the wattle and daub walls as if they were made of paper. Each sound is a tiny, insistent nudge, urging you awake, pinning you to the day ahead. There's no option to roll over, to plead for respite. The village is stirring, and its rhythm is not one of leisure, but of necessity. The animals need tending, the fields await. The endless cycle of work that sustains this fragile existence is already in motion. Their calls are not just noise. They are your schedule, your unwritten, inescapable timetable, a reminder that every moment of daylight is precious and must be filled with effort if you and your family are to see another season through. And as your eyes adjust to the gloom, another layer of this medieval morning begins to assert itself, one that bypasses sight and sound and goes straight to the core of your being. The air itself. It's thick, a heavy blanket woven from a truly unique collection of scents. First, perhaps, is the wood smoke, not the clean, crisp aroma of a distant campfire, but something closer, more immediate. It clings to the rough-hewn timbers of your one-room home, a permanent resident, sometimes sharp and biting from a newly stoked fire, sometimes a gentler, stale ghost of last night's warmth. Then, mingling with the smoke, an earthier, more pungent note rises to meet you. That would be the animals. Your precious pig, perhaps a few chickens, maybe even a calf in the harshest winter months, all sharing this humble space. Their presence is marked by the unmistakable, pervasive scent of dung, a constant, organic reminder of the thin line between human and animal existence here. It's not an intrusion, it's simply part of the household's olfactory signature, and layered upon this, the close, human scent of unwashed bodies. Sleep was a communal affair, warmth shared out of necessity, and bathing was a luxury few could afford or even consider daily. So the musk of sleep, of sweat, of life lived in close quarters adds its own distinct thread to the tapestry. Finally, underpinning it all is the smell of the earth itself, the damp soil of the floor beneath your straw pallet, the slightly musty aroma of the wattle and daub walls, breathing with the changing humidity. This complex, challenging perfume, a blend of the raw and the lived-in. This is the first deep breath of your medieval day. Imagine now, as your sense of smell acclimates to this rich, earthy perfume, your eyes begin their own slow, difficult adjustment. It's not the comforting dark of a familiar curtained bedroom, but a deeper, almost tangible gloom that presses in from all sides. Your eyes, so used to brighter spaces, would strain, perhaps even ache, as they fight to pierce the oppressive shadows. Light, when it eventually trickles in, is a miserly visitor, grudgingly admitted. Windows, as you might picture them, are a distant dream here. If your dwelling boasts such a feature, it's likely a mere slit in the thick wall, small and high. Perhaps it's covered by a rough wooden shutter, rarely open for fear of the cold or unwanted attention, or maybe a piece of oiled linen or scraped animal horn, offering only a murky, translucent glow rather than true clarity. Often, though, there is no window at all, just the open doorway serving as the main source of light, and the smoke hole in the roof, a distant patch of gray sky. This perpetual twilight dictates the rhythm of life within these walls. You'd move with a hesitant caution, your hands outstretched, learning the landscape of your small world by touch, as much as by sight. The vague, shadowy outlines of a crude wooden table, a few earthen pots stacked in a corner, the still forms of your family huddled nearby for warmth. These would emerge slowly, reluctantly, from the gloom. Every simple task, from locating your worn leather shoes, if you were fortunate enough to own any, to rekindling the embers of the fire, would be an exercise in navigating this dim, uncertain world. It's an existence rendered in muted tones, where the vibrant colors of daylight are an outdoor luxury, seldom fully welcomed inside. You might find yourself wondering how much of daily existence was simply felt, intuited, or navigated by rote memory of where each meager possession lay, rather than clearly seen. This constant, unwavering dimness wasn't a fleeting inconvenience. It was the very fabric of indoor life, a quiet, pervasive reminder of the stark realities of the time. As the faintest hint of dawn struggles to pierce the gloom of your small dwelling, you might yearn for the comfort of a warm, cleansing shower to start your day. But such luxuries are dreams for another age, another life. Here, the morning ritual, if you even partake, is a far more bracing affair. Forget any notion of privacy or gentle awakening. Personal hygiene is a brief, functional, and often very public, or at least shared, experience. Outside, or perhaps in a designated corner of your single-room home, a communal basin would await. Its contents? Not steaming, fragrant water, but a shallow pool of what was likely drawn from a nearby stream or well the day before, now biting cold. Imagine the surface, perhaps with a faint, murky film from yesterday's use, clouding the water or clinging to the rough-hewn wooden or pottery sides of the basin. You dip your hands, maybe a rough scrap of linen if you were fortunate, and splash this icy liquid onto your face. The shock would be immediate, a jolt far more effective than any rooster's crow, chasing away the last vestiges of sleep with its sharp, unforgiving chill against your skin. This wasn't about a leisurely soak or deep cleansing. It was a quick, perfunctory gesture, more to wipe the sleep from your eyes, and perhaps the worst of the night's grime from your hands and face, than to achieve any modern standard of cleanliness. The idea of a full body wash was a rare event, often reserved for specific occasions, if at all. For now, this frigid splash was your stark welcome to another day. A quiet reminder that even the simplest comforts we now take for granted were, for most then, an unimaginable extravagance. That brief, icy splash has done little to truly refresh you. But the day presses on, and with it, other, less appealing, necessities of existence. Let your thoughts drift for a moment to the quiet corner of your small, dark cottage. There, perhaps under the rough-hewn bed where you shivered through the night, or tucked away as discreetly as space allows, sits the chamber pot. Often a simple earthenware vessel, perhaps chipped and stained, unglazed and starkly utilitarian, it's a constant, silent companion through the long, cold nights. No need to brave the wolf's howl or the biting wind when nature calls in the deep dark. This humble pot serves its purpose, faithfully and without complaint. A small island of grim convenience in the otherwise unforgiving night, but with the thin morning light, however dim it filters through the wattle and daub, comes the inevitable chore. Someone, perhaps you, if you're old enough and deemed strong enough, must carry this now heavy, unpleasant burden. Imagine the feel of its cold, rough surface in your hands, the precarious balance required to prevent a spill, the distinctly earthy, acrid smell already beginning to permeate the air around it. You'd step carefully outside into the gray, damp dawn, the lingering chill of the night air still clinging to your thin clothes. And where do its contents go? There's no neat plumbing system, no hidden pipes to whisk it discreetly away to some unseen treatment plant. It might be a designated dung heap, a slowly mounting, festering pile not far from the dwelling, contributing its unique, pungent aroma to the already rich tapestry of farmyard smells, animal, earth, and human. Or perhaps it's a shallow trench dug nearby, or even just flung with a weary sigh into the nearest ditch, a daily offering to the indifferent, absorbent earth. A small, grim ritual repeated endlessly, a stark reminder of the raw, unfiltered realities of life, far removed from the porcelain thrones and scented sprays of our own quiet nights. The night yields, slowly, reluctantly, to a thin gray dawn. And as you stir, perhaps on that straw pallet we've imagined, another raw reality awaits. Your clothes. Forget the soft caress of cotton, the gentle hug of fleece we know so well. Your fingers, reaching out in the dim light filtering through a small, unglazed window or a crack in the wooden door, would instead brush against something altogether different. The rough, unyielding surface of homespun wool, or perhaps linen, if fortune smiled a little wider on your household. These wouldn't be garments chosen for comfort or style, but for sheer, stubborn durability meant to withstand seasons of hard wear. Imagine pulling on a tunic or a simple kirtle. It's likely still damp from the previous day's labor, or perhaps from the dew that settled in the perpetually cool, unheated air of your small home. The fabric, stiff and coarse against your skin, might carry the faint, lingering scent of wood smoke from the central hearth, the earthy aroma of sweat honestly earned, and maybe even a subtle smoky tang if meats were being cured nearby. A rare and precious undertaking. It's a far cry from the freshly laundered, softly conditioned scent we often take for granted. This material, woven by hand with painstaking, monotonous effort, offers little in the way of gentle welcome to the new day. Instead, it's a constant, abrasive reminder of the day's demands, a second skin that has seen too much toil and not enough gentle washing. The persistent itch, the way it chafes against skin already toughened by work. This isn't a fleeting discomfort to be remedied, but the accepted texture of life itself, a daily penance paid in the currency of discomfort. That persistent itch, that chafing texture, isn't something you can simply escape by changing into something softer when the day is done. The very idea of a wardrobe, a collection of garments to choose from, would seem an almost magical tale. Imagine, for a moment, your entire earthly collection of clothing. It's not neatly folded in a chest of drawers. More likely, it consists of the tunic you're wearing now, and perhaps, if you are exceptionally fortunate, one other. Just one. These garments are worn day in, day out, through sun, rain, sweat, and grime. They aren't tossed into a laundry basket at the first sign of a stain or a slight odor. Instead, they're worn until the fibers themselves begin to surrender, thinning to a ghostly transparency in places, seams groaning under the strain. A tear isn't a disaster leading to disposal. It's an invitation for careful, painstaking mending. A patch of rougher, newer cloth sewn over the old, adding yet another layer to the history etched into the fabric. This tunic is your constant companion, a silent witness to every hardship and every fleeting moment of respite, until it quite literally disintegrates from your back, ready to be reborn, perhaps, as a cleaning rag or stuffing for a drafty crack in the wall. The notion of fashion, of expressing oneself through varied attire, is a distant dream, as alien as the stars themselves. Now, consider your feet. If fortune smiles, and it's a fickle, parsimonious smile in these times, you might have something to cover them. Perhaps simple leather turn shoes, crafted from a single piece of hide, stitched together while inside out, and then, true to their name, turned right side out. Imagine the thinness of that leather sole beneath you, offering little more than a suggestion of a barrier between your skin and the cold, damp earth, or the sharp, unyielding stones of a pathway. Every pebble, every twig, every irregularity in the ground makes itself known, a constant, nagging reminder of the unforgiving world beneath. There's no cushioned insole, no arch support to speak of, just the barest shield. Or maybe you'd clatter about in roughly hewn wooden clogs, practical perhaps for the muddiest, muckiest parts of the village, but hardly a comfort. Picture the unyielding wood against your soles, the way they'd chafe and rub with every laborious step, the hollow, echoing sound they'd make on a packed earth floor or a rough cobble. They're heavy, clumsy, and offer a different kind of discomfort, a jarring, percussive experience for your already weary feet. Think of the chill seeping through that thin leather on a frosty morning, or the way water would instantly soak through, leaving your feet cold and sodden for hours on end. These aren't shoes designed for leisurely strolls or athletic prowess. They are the most basic of necessities, a thin, often inadequate line drawn between you and the raw elements. And for many, even this rudimentary protection was an unattainable luxury. The poorest often went barefoot, their soles toughened over time like old leather, yet still vulnerable to every hidden thorn, sharp shard, and biting frost. Your feet, in this world are not pampered appendages, but hard-working tools, constantly tested, rarely comfortable, and even more rarely dry. Stepping inside, or perhaps it's more accurate to say, ducking inside, you'd leave the biting cold of your inadequate shoes and the damp earth behind, only to enter a different kind of assault on the senses. The heart of your single-room dwelling, if heart is the right word for such a smoky, demanding organ, is the central hearth. There's no grand stone fireplace here, no neatly stacked logs inviting cozy contemplation. Imagine instead a shallow pit, perhaps ringed with a few stones, directly on the packed earth floor, often right in the middle of everything. This is where life, in its most elemental form, happens. The meager stew, perhaps some boiled grains, and whatever sparse vegetables could be foraged, simmers here in a single pot, a gloopy, often bland promise of sustenance. The flickering, dancing flames offer the only real warmth against the damp chill that seeps relentlessly through the wattle and daub walls, the only real light as dusk settles like a heavy blanket. But this life-giver, this focal point of domesticity, is also a relentless tormentor. Without a proper chimney, the smoke from the burning wood, often green or damp, whatever could be gathered, has nowhere to truly escape. Your eyes would constantly sting, red-rimmed and watery, peering through the haze. A persistent hacking cough would likely become your unwelcome shadow, a rasping soundtrack to your days, and a constant irritation in your throat. The air itself is thick, a hazy gray-brown veil that stings the back of your throat and clings to your hair and simple clothes with a stubborn, sooty perfume. Every surface, every piece of rough-spun cloth, every meager possession is coated in a fine layer of grime, faintly sticky to the touch. If you're fortunate, a small hopeful hole in the thatched roof above offers a theoretical escape route for the worst of it. But theoretical is often the operative word. More often, the smoke just curls and eddies, lingering like an unwanted, eye-watering guest, painting the low ceiling and walls a deep, tarry black over the years. It's a constant, acrid companion, this smoke. The unavoidable price you pay for a flicker of warmth and a hot meal in a world that offers precious few other comforts, and certainly not clean air. And it's not just the smoke that finds its way in or out. Listen closely, especially as night falls and the world outside grows quiet. You'll begin to hear the wind, a constant, mournful sigh through the colder months. It's a persistent, unwelcome houseguest, this wind, never needing an invitation, always finding a way. It snakes its way with insidious patience through every tiny, forgotten crack in the wattle and daub walls, those interwoven branches daubed with mud, dung, and clay, which inevitably shrink and crack over time, offering countless unseen entry points. It whistles through the gaps where rough-hewn timbers of the frame don't quite meet, a high, thin song of the pervasive cold. You might huddle closer to that smoky central hearth, drawing your knees up to your chest, but the drafts are relentless, invisible fingers plucking at your clothes, whispering reminders of the biting chill that rules the world just beyond your flimsy shelter. Feel that icy caress tracing a path down your spine, or the sudden chill that raises gooseflesh on your arms even as your front toasts by the fire. That's just the wind. Exploring, finding yet another new route through your home. A constant, unwelcome reminder of the outside. The very idea of a consistently warm room, a space where the damp cold doesn't creep into your very bones and settle there, is a distant, almost fantastical dream, an unimaginable luxury. You might wrap yourself in whatever thin, rough woolens you possess, perhaps an old sack if you're truly desperate for another layer, but the chill has a way of seeping in, a dull ache that settles deep within your joints. It makes every morning a shiver-inducing reawakening to this pervasive cold. That small fire in the center of the hut offers a fleeting, precious circle of smoky comfort, but step just a few feet away, and the wind reclaims its territory instantly, a reminder of its omnipresent power. And as that deep, persistent chill settles around you, your attention might naturally drift downwards, towards the very ground that supports this fragile shelter. There are no polished wooden boards here, no fragrant rushes carefully laid to soften your step. Instead, You'd feel the unyielding, compacted earth beneath your feet, a surface beaten hard by generations of comings and goings, by bare feet and simple, worn-out leather shoes. It's a floor that's rarely, if ever, truly dry, a shifting mosaic of darker damp patches and slightly less damp patches, always cool to the touch, often outright cold, especially as you venture further from the meager warmth of that precious smoky fire. Imagine, for a moment, the sensation of that floor beneath you. The cold doesn't just touch your skin. It seems to seep upwards, a persistent coolness traveling through the thin soles of your shoes, or perhaps just through the hardened calluses of your bare feet, if shoes are a luxury you can't always afford. Each step is a careful negotiation with its inherent unevenness. Little dips and almost imperceptible rises worn into the dirt by the constant, rhythmic shuffle of daily life. This floor isn't merely a surface. It's a silent, earthy archive, a gritty chronicle of existence. Think of all it has patiently absorbed over the years. The slops of watery stew, droplets of precious ale, the muddy footprints, dragged in from the relentless fields, perhaps even the quiet tears shed in moments of despair, or the blood from a child's scraped knee. It holds the lingering scent of wood smoke, of damp earth, and the faintest, almost imperceptible traces of every meager meal cooked, every hushed conversation, every restless night endured upon its unforgiving embrace. It's a history written in layers of grime and compaction, a constant, tangible reminder of a life lived incredibly close to the soil, in every conceivable sense of the word, a foundation both literally and figuratively humble. That humble floor, a tapestry woven from daily life and the very earth itself, now bears witness to a new seasonal layer. As winter's icy fingers begin to tighten their grip around your small dwelling, the outside world becomes a stark, unforgiving landscape. The wind, a mournful dirge, whips around the thin wattle and daub walls, and a decision born of grim necessity is made. Your precious few livestock, perhaps a scrawny cow whose ribs you can count, a couple of prized sheep, their wool, a shield against the frost, or even a grunting pig if fortune has smiled thinly upon you, are ushered inside. They are not so much guests as fellow huddlers against the encroaching freeze, their animal warmth a small vital comfort in the single smoky room. Their safety from the desperate fangs of wolves, or the even more desperate hands of starving neighbors, is non-negotiable. Imagine the already intimate space constricting further. You might find yourself sleeping almost nose to flank with a sheep, its lanolin-rich fleece pungent and oily against your own rough-spun tunic. The air grows thick, a challenging miasma of damp earth, human sweat, animal dung, wet straw, and the ever-present wood smoke that stings your eyes and lines your throat. The sounds, too, are an intimate chorus, the soft, rhythmic chewing of cud, a sudden snort, the restless shuffling of hooves on the dirt floor, blending with the hushed breathing, and perhaps a hacking cough from your own family. Sleep, in such a place, is a brief, uneasy truce, found amidst a shared, steaming, fragile warmth, a collective breath held against the vast, indifferent cold outside. But even that precious shared warmth, hard-won from huddled bodies and animal breath, cannot entirely banish the deeper, more persistent companion of your medieval home, the damp. It's a presence as constant as the smoky air, an unwelcome guest that seeps into everything. As dawn tentatively filters through any cracks or the open doorway, it illuminates not just the sparse interior, but the very moisture clinging to the rough-hewn timbers and the packed earth beneath. Imagine waking not just to the sounds of animals, but to the soft, insistent rhythm of water finding its way through the thatch overhead. That thick blanket of straw or reeds, while picturesque from afar, is rarely a perfect seal against a determined rain. Each drop might land with a soft plink or a dull thud onto the earthen floor below, a floor that is, quite literally, the earth itself, packed down by generations. It's perpetually cool, often slick with moisture, a vast absorbent sponge that slowly releases its captive dampness back into the single room you call home, making the air itself feel heavy. This constant humidity is an open invitation for mold, its shadowy blooms creeping up the lower portions of the wattle and daub walls, a fuzzy, unwelcome tapestry of greens and blacks. Its musty, slightly sweet, earthy scent would be an ever-present note in the symphony of smells, mingling with the wood smoke and animal odors. And with this dampness comes a chill, not the sharp bite of winter air, but a clinging, pervasive coolness that settles into your clothes, your bedding, and deep into your bones. A chill the small, smoky fire can only temporarily push back, never truly defeat. This ever-present damp was simply a fact of life, a texture to your days and nights. That constant dampness wasn't just a feature of the walls. It was a companion you shared your home with. And home, for most, was a single, smoke-stained room. Forget the modern luxury of a bedroom, a living room, a kitchen. All of life's messy, vibrant, and often pungent activities were crammed into this one space. A space likely no larger than a generous modern living room, if that. There was no upstairs to escape to, no separate quarters, just the one, all-encompassing interior, its boundaries defined by those same damp wattle and daub walls. Imagine trying to find a moment's peace here. In this one room, your entire family, perhaps 6, 8, even 10 souls, would sleep, their bodies huddled close together on straw pallets or directly on the packed earth floor, sharing warmth and, inevitably, any passing ailments. This was also where meager meals were prepared over the central hearth, the smoke often struggling to find its way out through a simple hole in the thatched roof, frequently filling the space with an acrid haze that stung your eyes and coated every surface in a fine, greasy layer of soot. The very air would be a rich, if somewhat challenging, tapestry of human existence. The sounds would be a constant, intimate symphony. The crackle of the fire, the low murmur of voices, a baby's cry, the rhythmic breathing, or perhaps the snoring of those asleep just inches away from you. And the smells. Oh, the smells. Unwashed bodies, the earthy aroma of simmering pottage, or perhaps just boiled grains, lingering damp, and the faint, sharp tang of animal waste if any small livestock like chickens were brought in for safety or warmth during bitter nights. There was no door to close for solitude, no quiet corner to truly call your own. Every argument, every illness, every birth, and often every death played out in this communal theater, witnessed by all. Privacy, as we understand it, was a concept so alien it might as well have belonged to another world, a whisper of an idea lost in the constant pressing reality of shared existence. And even when human voices fell silent, if they ever truly did, the house itself would speak. Your shelter, a timber-framed cottage, was a living, breathing entity in its own right, though perhaps not always a comforting one. Imagine lying there in the dark, the day's meager meal settled in your stomach. The wind, an ever-present companion on the open fields, would play the house like an instrument, coaxing out its particular rustic music. Those sturdy oak or elm timbers, hewn by hand and slotted together with a skill born of necessity, would groan under the strain of their burden. A sudden, sharp gust might send a shiver through the entire frame, a deep, wooden sigh that could resonate in your very chest, a palpable vibration against the packed earth floor. The joints, perhaps packed with little more than hope and time rather than sophisticated carpentry, would creak and protest with each subtle shift of the wind, each settling of the damp earth beneath. It's the sound of a structure constantly negotiating its existence with the elements, a testament to resilience, but also a reminder of its fragility. And the walls, those panels of wattle, woven hazel or willow branches, pliable and springy, smeared with their thick daub of mud, clay, straw, and perhaps even animal dung for binding, they had their own chorus. The wind wouldn't just buffet them, it would insinuate itself, whispering through 1,000 tiny imperfections, places where the daub had cracked or shrunk away from the timbers. This might be a dry, rustling sound, like ancient, brittle paper, or perhaps it carried the hushed secrets of everyone who had ever huddled within these same walls through countless nights. There was no true silence to be found, only a shifting symphony of the structure's complaints and its quiet endurance. Sleep, when it came, would be punctuated by these sounds, a constant reminder of the thin, permeable barrier between you and the often harsh, indifferent world outside. The house wasn't just a place. It was an unceasing, sometimes unsettling, lullaby of creaks, whispers, and the soft, mournful groans of wood and earth, a constant companion to the rhythms of your own breath in the shared darkness. As the gray light of dawn eventually seeps through the cracks in the wattle and daub, painting faint, dusty stripes across the packed earth floor, you stir. The chill of the night still clings to the air, a damp, earthy scent mingling with the lingering smokiness from last night's fire. Your awakening isn't met with the promise of a comforting hot drink, no invigorating aroma of roasted beans or steeped leaves. Those small luxuries are comforts of a future you cannot imagine, a distant dream. Instead, your breakfast, if it can be grandly called that, is a humble affair, laid out perhaps on a rough-hewn plank or eaten straight from the pot. A hunk of dark, coarse bread might be your primary fare, likely made from rye or barley. It's dense and notably chewy, almost abrasive against the tongue. Each bite is a testament to its simple, hearty ingredients, a world away from anything light or fluffy. It's substantial in its own way, a slow release of energy, but not exactly a joy to consume. Alongside this, or maybe in its place if grain is precious, there might be pottage. Imagine a thin, watery gruel, the reheated remnants from the night before, perhaps with a few lonely peas, beans, or scraps of foraged greens swimming in the murky liquid. Its flavor is a muted echo of earth and vegetables with a lingering whisper of wood smoke from the hearth. This isn't a meal to linger over, to savor with delight. It's fuel, a meager offering to stave off the immediate pangs of hunger before the long day's labor truly begins. A quiet, almost somber start, designed purely for function, not for pleasure. After that thin, smoky pottage, a deep thirst would surely follow, a dryness in the throat calling for relief. But reaching for a chilled, sparkling glass of clear water? That's a luxury centuries away. Your water source as a medieval peasant is likely the village well, a communal affair, or perhaps a nearby stream, often a considerable walk from your humble dwelling. Picture the well, often uncovered, a dark, circular mouth in the earth, a collecting point not just for life-giving water, but also for dust, leaves, and whatever else the wind whimsically deposits. Worse still, it collects seepage from the surrounding ground frequently trodden by livestock, and not too far from where human waste might be disposed of. Or perhaps you fetch water from the local stream, watching it babble its way through the fields. It might appear clearer, more natural, but its purity is a deceptive illusion. Upstream, animals might be waiting, tanneries or other small industries could be releasing their effluent, and general refuse could find its way into the current. The water you'd scoop into your wooden bucket or clay jug wouldn't be crystalline. It might hold a fine suspension of silt, giving it a cloudy appearance, a faint brownish or greenish tinge depending on the season and recent rains. It would taste intensely of the earth, of minerals, perhaps with a slightly metallic or even stagnant note, if the source isn't flowing swiftly or the well water has sat too long. Every mouthful, then, becomes a small, unacknowledged lottery. Will this drink truly quench your thirst and refresh you, or will it carry the unseen seeds of dysentery, of some lingering fever, a debilitating stomach cramp? There are no guarantees, just the pressing daily need to hydrate, and the quiet, almost prayerful hope that your constitution is strong enough to handle whatever invisible passengers come with it. This constant, low-level gamble with something as fundamental as water was just another thread in the tough, often unforgiving fabric of medieval peasant life. The precariousness of water was a constant hum beneath the surface of daily life, and this uncertainty extended, quite naturally, to what little food might grace your rough-hewn wooden trencher. The harvest, even in a good year, was rarely bountiful enough to see a family through the lean months with any real comfort. That small patch of land you tilled, with its meager offerings of barley or rye, wouldn't stretch far. So, Beyond the fields, the wild, untamed edges of the world became your reluctant larder. Imagine yourself, then, stepping out from the smoky dimness of your hut, an empty sack or woven basket clutched in hand. The sun might be dappling through the leaves of the nearby woods, or perhaps a chill mist still clings to the ground. Your stomach, a hollow ache, reminds you that the thin pottage from last night did little to satisfy. Now you must become a keen-eyed searcher, a patient gleaner of nature's often stingy bounty. This wasn't a quaint countryside hobby. It was a grimly essential skill. Your eyes would learn to scan the undergrowth for the telltale gleam of ripe blackberries, their dark juice staining your fingers as you carefully plucked them from thorny brambles. You'd search for the hardy hazelnut, tucked away in its frilled green cup, or the earthy scent of wild garlic and pungent nettles. Blanched, they could bulk out that ever-present stew. Edible roots, fungi, a dangerous game of identification this one, and a surprising array of leaves and flowers all held potential, if you knew what to look for, and, just as importantly, what to avoid. This intricate knowledge of the local flora, passed down through generations, was a lifeline. A single mistake, a brightly colored berry that mimics an edible cousin, could mean days of agony or worse. For you, stepping into this world without that ingrained wisdom, the forest would be a beautiful, but ultimately unyielding and perhaps even treacherous, landscape. Every rustle in the leaves, every unfamiliar plant, a question mark between sustenance and sickness. Learning to read this living pantry and quickly would be a matter of daily survival. This hard-won bounty from the forest, or perhaps a rare portion of butchered livestock, presented an immediate pressing concern: how to make it last. There was no cool sanctuary of a refrigerator, no convenient freezer to call upon. Instead, your medieval kitchen, often just a smoky corner of your single room, relied on ancient, relentless allies against decay: salt, smoke, and the patient drying air. Imagine a piece of meat, if you were fortunate. It wouldn't be destined for a gentle grilling. More likely, it would be buried in a mountain of coarse gray salt, the crystals working tirelessly to draw out every last drop of moisture. Days, even weeks later, it would emerge transformed, denser, darker, and profoundly salty. The texture might be tough, almost leathery, and the taste an uncompromising wave of salt that clung to the palate. This was survival, not subtlety. Alternatively, that precious protein might hang for long periods in the rafters, bathed in the constant, acrid haze from your hearth. The wood smoke would curl around it, a ghostly embrace, slowly curing the flesh, turning it a deep, burnished mahogany. The air in your home would carry this perpetual, pungent perfume, a mix of burning wood, preserved food, and damp earth. Every bite of such smoked fare would be infused with that resinous, smoky tang, a flavor as common and constant as the chill in winter. Fruits and herbs, too, would undergo their own transformation, laid out to shrivel and concentrate, their sweetness or pungency intensified, a small, potent reminder of summer's generosity in the lean months ahead. And somewhere near that smoky hearth, always, there would be the pottage pot. Imagine it now, a simple earthenware vessel, perhaps a little chipped at the rim, blackened by countless fires, nestled amongst the embers or hanging from a sooty chain. It's rarely empty, this pot. It's a kind of perpetual stew, a living, simmering history of the past few days, or even weeks' meals, bubbling away with a quiet determination. Each morning, or whenever a scrap becomes available, something new might be added. Perhaps a handful of tough, slightly bitter greens foraged from the edge of the field, a few wizened carrots pulled from the damp, cool earth, or the precious addition of a leftover bone, boiled and reboiled until every last vestige of flavor and nourishment has been coaxed from it. The aroma drifting from it would be complex. An earthy, vegetal scent, sometimes sharpened by wild garlic or mustardy herbs, sometimes softened by oats or barley used to thicken the brew into something more substantial. It wouldn't always be a vibrant, fresh smell, but the persistent, life-sustaining hum of sustenance. You might peer into its murky depths, the surface barely disturbed save for a slow, lazy bubble rising and popping, releasing a puff of steam that mingles with the wood smoke. The texture, should you dip a rough wooden spoon, would likely be a thick, gloopy gruel on some days, or perhaps a thinner, more watery affair on others, all depending on the day's luck and the season's meager offerings. It's not a meal of excitement, this pottage. It's the very rhythm of survival, a monotonous but utterly vital current of calories, ensuring you had just enough weary energy to face another long, hard day. Each spoonful, a familiar, often bland, but always essential taste of endurance. Beyond that ever-present pottage, the landscape of your daily food would seem remarkably sparse to a modern sensibility. Imagine your meals, day after day, painted in the muted tones of the earth itself. The star of this very limited show was almost always grain. Coarse, dark bread, perhaps made from rye or barley, often dense enough to feel like a serious commitment with every bite. This wasn't the airy crumb you might picture. It was sustenance, pure and simple, sometimes gritty from the millstone, a steadfast companion to that bubbling pot. Occasionally the monotony might be broken by a humble root vegetable, wrested from your small, precious garden plot. A turnip, maybe, or some hardy greens if the season was kind, their earthy flavors a subtle shift rather than a revolution. An onion, if you were truly fortunate, might lend its sharp perfume to the pottage, a fleeting moment of complexity. But forget the vibrant array of choices you know today. The medieval peasant's larder was a testament to making do with very, very little, a constant exercise in stretching meager resources. And meat? That was a whispered luxury, a rare visitor to the peasant's table, often more dream than reality. Perhaps a sliver of salt pork, carefully hoarded, its intense savoriness a jolt to a palate dulled by endless grains. Or, if a festival allowed, or if one dared the forest's forbidden bounty, a small bird or rabbit. For the most part, though, the animal chorus you heard was for someone else's feast. Your stomach would learn a stoic patience, a deep acquaintance with the plain, the unadorned, the relentlessly repetitive cycle of simple carbohydrates. It's a quiet thought, isn't it? How much our expectation of variety is a modern invention, built on foundations those hardy souls could scarcely dream of. And speaking of variety, or rather its profound absence, let's just rest for a moment with the flavors that would, or more often wouldn't, greet your tongue. Try to picture your kitchen, not with a gleaming spice rack filled with colorful jars from across the globe, but with a few humble offerings. There might be a precious pinch of salt, carefully guarded, its ability to transform even the simplest gruel, making it worth more than you might imagine. Perhaps a small clay pot holds some dried mustard seeds, ready to be ground into a paste that offered a somewhat blunt, earthy heat. A few bunches of foraged herbs might hang drying from a low, smoky rafter. Parsley, perhaps, or the hearty notes of sage and thyme. The fiery, invigorating kiss of black pepper, the sweet, warming embrace of cinnamon, the almost magical, exotic allure of nutmeg or cloves. These were phantoms, spices carried on impossibly long, perilous journeys from sun-drenched, distant lands, their cost far, far beyond a peasant's entire yearly toil, perhaps even a lifetime's. Your meals, therefore, were seasoned by the immediate generosity or stinginess of the earth around you. Wild garlic, sharp and assertive, might lend a welcome pungent kick to your endless pottage. A sprig of that carefully cultivated thyme or sage, plucked from a small garden patch beside the cottage, could bring a fleeting hint of aromatic freshness, a whisper of the forest floor. But the complex symphony of flavors we conjure daily, almost without thought, with just a flick of the wrist, that simply didn't exist for you. It's a quiet thought, isn't it? To taste the world in such muted, earthy tones where a single, strong herb might be the dominant, celebrated note of a dish, its character stark and undiluted by a chorus of companions. The joy of discovery for your palate would be a far quieter, more intensely local and deeply subtle affair. The everyday tang, the zest, the sheer kaleidoscope of tastes we so effortlessly access would be an unimaginable luxury. And amidst that quiet world of taste, there was one substance, a mineral, so mundane to us now, that held an almost sacred power in your small, smoky home. Salt. Not the fine iodized powder we sprinkle with abandon, but often coarser, grayer, perhaps even bearing the faint earthy scent of its distant coastal origins. Its primary magic wasn't even for your tongue, though a sparing dash was a blessing. No, its true desperate value lay in its power over time, its ability to wage war against the relentless march of decay. Imagine the precious, hard-won piece of meat, perhaps from a piglet carefully fattened, or a rare catch. Without refrigeration, its life would be fleeting, a brief window before rot set in. Here, salt was your ally. You'd rub those coarse gray crystals deep into the flesh, the sting of it perhaps sharp on your calloused fingers, watching as it drew out the precious moisture, transforming the meat into something tougher, yes, but something that would last. Each granule was a tiny shield, preserving a measure of sustenance against the lean, hungry months ahead. To waste salt would be a minor tragedy, a careless disregard for future hunger. It was hoarded, traded carefully, a currency of survival more than a simple seasoning. The salt box, tucked away, was a treasure chest. So when you did taste it in your thin pottage, that faint, briny kick was a reminder not just of flavor, but of the painstaking effort to keep starvation one more day at bay. It's a stark thought, isn't it? How the very foundation of food security rested on something we now spill without a second thought. And what would you wash down that meager, salty pottage with? Perhaps a refreshing cup of cool water from the well? That innocent-looking water, drawn from the village stream or a shallow, shared well, could be a gamble, a silent invitation to illness. It might look clear, but unseen dangers often lurked within the runoff from nearby animal pens, the general lack of sanitation making it a frequent breeding ground for sickness. A simple drink of water could, quite literally, be the end of you, or at least the beginning of a very unpleasant, weakening ordeal. So instead, you'd likely reach for something called small beer, or a very weak ale. Now try to erase any image of a frothy, golden pint from your local pub. This was something profoundly different, far more utilitarian. Brewed in most households, sometimes daily, it was thin, often cloudy, and contained very little alcohol, sometimes less than 1%. The crucial benefit, the life-saving grace of this ubiquitous drink, wasn't its flavor, nor its almost negligible ability to inebriate. It was the simple, almost accidental fact that the water used to make it had been boiled during the brewing process. That heat, that brief turmoil in the pot, was enough to dispatch many of the harmful bacteria that made fresh water so treacherous. Imagine the taste. Perhaps a little sour from wild yeasts, faintly sweet from the malt if you were lucky, but mostly watery, with a thin, grainy character. It wouldn't be a drink you'd savor for its complex notes, but for its relative safety, its quiet promise of hydration without agony. It was a daily necessity, and children, adults, everyone would partake throughout the day. It's a rather sobering thought, isn't it? That this humble, often unappetizing brew was a cornerstone of daily survival, a weak, home-brewed shield against the invisible enemies teeming in every unboiled drop. That weak ale, a small comfort against unseen dangers in the water, was one daily negotiation with fate, but an even heavier weight would settle in your chest, a constant low hum of anxiety tied directly to the earth beneath your feet, the harvest. Every stage, from the first tender shoots pushing through the damp soil to the final gathering, was watched with a desperate hope. Because a bad harvest wasn't just a disappointment, a mere belt-tightening inconvenience. It was the specter of hunger, real and raw, looming over your family, over the entire village. Imagine you, looking out over the fields your family has toiled in for generations. The sun beats down, but the wheat is thin, the ears stunted and pale. Or perhaps the rains never came, and the ground is cracked and dusty, the young plants withered before their time, their hopeful green faded to a brittle brown. Maybe a late frost, cruel and silent, has blackened the delicate blossoms in the small orchard, dashing hopes of even a meager fruit yield. There's a particular cold knot that forms deep in the stomach, isn't there, when you see nature, the very source of life, turn so capriciously against you. This wasn't a vague worry for some distant future. It was a visceral, gnawing fear that could stretch for agonizing months, coloring every interaction, every whispered prayer. The laughter of your children might suddenly sound a little too loud, a fragile thing against the growing silence of emptying grain sacks and the quiet dread in your neighbor's eyes. Starvation wasn't an abstract concept from a faraway land. It was a recurring visitor, a grim, familiar shadow that could fall across any threshold, yours included. It made every mouthful precious, every shared crust a quiet testament to survival. Beyond the gnawing ache of hunger, another, more immediate chill often threatened to invade your small world. Imagine your home, not as some romanticized, cozy cottage, but as a dim, single room, perpetually hazy with the sting of wood smoke. At its very heart, the fire. This wasn't a grand, roaring blaze for mere comfort, but a carefully managed, utterly precious resource, the flickering soul of your dwelling. Keeping it alive was your relentless, moment-to-moment duty, a thread woven through your existence from the first gray light of dawn until the deepest starless night. You develop an intimate knowledge, a true skill in coaxing life from embers. You'd learn the specific feel of different woods under your calloused fingers. The satisfying dry snap of good kindling, the frustrating, smoky reluctance of damp logs gathered in the rain. The smell of wood smoke, sharp and resinous, would cling to your hair, your rough-spun clothes becoming a constant, almost acrid perfume that defined your days. Letting that vital spark die meant a bitter, bone-deep cold seeping through the porous wattle and daub walls. A cold that made sleep a shivering torment and work an agonizing, stiff-limbed struggle. But an untended flame, a stray, dancing spark amidst the dry straw on the floor and the ancient, tinder-dry timber of your hut, promised something far worse. One lapse in vigilance, one gust of wind whistling through a poorly sealed doorway, and your meager shelter, everything you owned, could be consumed by a terrifyingly swift inferno. The delicate line between life-giving warmth and utter, devastating ruin was as thin and unpredictable as that flickering flame itself, tended with weary, ever-watchful eyes. It was a constant, silent negotiation with an element that could sustain you or snatch everything away in a terrifying heartbeat. That heartbeat, a fragile rhythm against the constant, gnawing worry. Imagine, for a moment, settling down for the night. The day's meager fire banked low, a scattering of orange embers glowing softly in the hearth. The air in your single room is thick with the scent of wood smoke, a smell so pervasive it clings to your rough-spun clothes, your hair, the very walls around you. These walls, perhaps wattle and daub, woven branches smeared with clay, dung, and mud, are propped up by a timber frame, often green wood that warped as it dried, leaving gaps for drafts and, terrifyingly, for sparks to find refuge. Above you, a thatched roof, layers of straw or reed, meticulously laid but ultimately a perfect dry bed for any errant ember taking flight. You lie there, on your straw pallet, listening to the wind sighing outside, a mournful sound that often carries with it the distant, panicked shouts if a neighbor's home has caught. The slightest unusual crackle from the hearth, a sudden, unexpected flare of light, dancing on the rough-hewn walls, and your heart would surely lurch, sleep instantly banished. Because if that spark did escape, if it found purchase on a stray piece of kindling, a forgotten rag, or the invitingly dry thatch itself, there would be so little precious time. The flames would lick, then roar, a hungry orange beast consuming your world with astonishing, terrifying speed. There's no organized fire brigade to call, no sophisticated extinguisher, only the frantic, desperate effort of your own hands, perhaps joined by equally panicked neighbors, to save yourselves, a precious tool, or a vital blanket. Mostly, though, you'd watch as your shelter, your small, painstakingly built universe, crumbles to ash and smoke. The loss would be absolute, a stark, smoldering reminder of how tenuously life and all its meager comforts clung on. And if, by some small mercy, your home didn't vanish in that terrifying plume of smoke, if your meager possessions somehow endured, then your existence settled into a different kind of rhythm, the quiet, constant hum of mending. There was no casually discarding the worn or the broken. Such a concept would have been utterly alien, a fantasy from a world impossibly rich. Every single item, from the rough leather turn shoes on your feet, perpetually damp, to the very roof over your head, was held onto, patched, and repaired, again and again, until it could simply be mended no more. Picture your tunic, likely your only one, made of coarse, homespun wool, perhaps dyed a faded, earthy tone with whatever plants were at hand, a dull brown from walnut husks, or a muted yellow from weld. A tear wasn't a minor inconvenience to be ignored. It was an urgent task. You'd sit by the dim, smoky light of the central hearth, the air thick with the smell of burning peat or wood, or perhaps catch the thin afternoon sun filtering through a tiny, shuttered window, your fingers patiently guiding a needle, likely made of bone or bronze, threaded with equally coarse linen or wool. A wooden bowl splits from the constant cycle of wet and dry. You'd try to bind it with twisted sinew or a carefully hoarded piece of wire. A tool handle snaps. You'd carefully whittle a new one from scavenged wood, the faint, sharp scent of the fresh-cut timber. A small, clean note in your small hut. Even the wattle and daub walls of your dwelling. That earthy amalgam of woven branches packed with mud, animal dung, and straw, cried out for regular, wearying attention. The daub would crack in the dry summer heat and crumble away in the damp winter frost, leaving gaps for the wind to whistle through. So you'd be out there, mixing a fresh, sticky batch of the stuff, your hands chilled and caked, pressing it into the breeches. A never-ending Sisyphean battle against the slow decay encouraged by the elements. Nothing was truly disposable, because everything represented an immense investment of time, precious energy, and scarce materials. To throw something away that could still serve, however imperfectly, was to discard a piece of your own hard-won precarious life. Indeed, that precariousness bred an almost breathtaking resourcefulness. With so little to hand, every broken tool, every worn-out container, wasn't a problem to be solved with coin, but a challenge for your own ingenuity. Consider your kitchen, if such a grand term could apply to a smoky corner of your single room. That lopsided spoon you stir your meager stew with, you, or perhaps a family member, would have patiently whittled it from a piece of scavenged wood, its handle worn smooth by countless grips, its bowl imperfect but functional. The rough pottery jug holding your water, cool and slightly porous, might have been shaped by local hands, or perhaps you made do with something even simpler, a dried gourd, its skin papery and thin, or a leather flask, smelling faintly of tannins and whatever it last held. Baskets, essential for everything from gathering firewood to storing precious, meager handfuls of dried beans, would be woven from willow shoots or tough grasses, their patterns a testament to generations of passed-down skill. Each strand, bent and coaxed into place, represented hours of work, often with hands already sore from field labor. Even the rope to hang your single threadbare garment, or to tether a goat, if you were so fortunate, would be twisted from plant fibers, coarse and strong, or perhaps strips of animal hide. The air itself might carry the faint, earthy scent of these creations, damp clay, green wood, drying reeds. There was no making a quick trip to the store. There was only the slow, methodical transformation of the natural world into the bare essentials of human existence. A constant, quiet battle, waged with skill, patience, and an intimate knowledge of the forest and field. Now, as night begins to draw its dark cloak over the land, you might seek rest within those wattle and daub walls, hoping for a moment of peace. But the quiet of the evening wouldn't be entirely your own, not by a long stretch. Listen closely, beyond the sigh of the wind through any ill-fitting door, and you'd hear it, the soft, almost imperceptible rustle in the thatch above, a dry, papery sound. Or perhaps a faint, determined scratching from the corner where your meager food stores. A handful of grain, a dried piece of something are kept. These are the sounds of your other housemates, the ones who pay no rent and observe no curfews. The sleek, shadowy forms of rats, the nervous flicker of mice, a skittering legion of beetles, fleas, and other less distinguishable crawlies. They were simply an accepted, if unwelcome, part of medieval life, as common as the damp chill that settled in your bones. You might try to deter them, of course. A prized mouser, a lean and hungry cat, could earn its keep tenfold, but even the best hunter couldn't be everywhere. Perhaps you'd diligently stuff rags, moss, or even mud into newfound holes, or sweep the dirt floor with a worn besom broom, a small, daily ritual against the inevitable. But pest control as we understand it, a world free of such intrusions, that was a distant, almost unimaginable dream. These tiny creatures, bold in the dim, smoky light of a single tallow candle or the dying embers of the fire, would be a constant, intimate presence. Imagine the unsettling feeling of something brushing against you in the dark, sharing your already cramped space, your precious, hard-won food, even the dubious warmth of your straw-stuffed mattress, with these unwelcome, persistent guests. It's a humbling, slightly itchy thought, isn't it? The constant, quiet, and often losing battle against an unseen, often unheard, but ever-present population, an integral part of the medieval home's unique ecosystem. And, as the last of the daylight truly surrendered, bleeding away from the small, unglazed windows, or perhaps just a simple opening in the wattle and daub wall, the interior of your medieval home would transform into something else entirely. The already dim, smoky light you endured during the day now gives way to a profound, almost tactile darkness, a darkness that settles heavily around you. If you were fortunate, a single precious tallow candle might sputter bravely on a crude ledge, its weak flame casting long, dancing shadows that writhe and leap, making familiar objects seem monstrous and alien. Its greasy animal fat scent would mingle with the ever-present wood smoke and the damp, earthy smell of the floor. More likely, perhaps, only the faint, ruddy glow of the dying embers in the central hearth offers any orientation, a fragile beacon in a sea of black. Imagine, now, trying to move through this space. Your feet, very likely bare or clad in worn thin leather, would cautiously search for purchase on the uneven, packed earth floor, cold beneath your soles. Every piece of meager, handmade furniture, a rough-hewn stool you bump with your shin, a low-sleeping pallet you stumble over, a forgotten wooden bowl, becomes a potential enemy in the gloom, a shadowy obstacle. The air itself feels thick, heavy with smoke, and the day's accumulated smells, and shapes are indistinct, more felt than truly seen. Tripping wasn't merely an inconvenience. It could mean a nasty fall onto the hard earth, a twisted ankle that would make tomorrow's vital work impossible, or, disastrously, upsetting the precious smoldering fire, plunging you into absolute, disorienting blackness and losing your only source of warmth until morning. You'd learn to navigate by a keen sense of memory, by the cool, rough texture of the walls against your fingertips, by the subtle dips and rises in the floor beneath your feet. Each step would be a careful, quiet calculation in a world utterly devoid of light switches, a world without the easy certainty of a moonlit path indoors, where shadows held sway and silence was broken only by the soft sounds of a sleeping household, or perhaps the rustle of those unseen, persistent guests. The silence you thought you'd found within these four walls is deceptive, you see. It's not an absence of sound, but rather a gentle tapestry woven from the intimate noises of life, up close and very personal. Listen closely, as your ears adjust to the deep, velvety darkness. That rhythmic, rumbling snore isn't distant. It's likely your father, or perhaps an older brother, lying just a few feet away on another straw pallet, his breath catching and releasing in a saw-like cadence. It might be joined by a softer, whistling counterpoint from your mother, and the varied, smaller snores and snufflings of younger siblings packed in like tired puppies, their small bodies generating a surprising array of nocturnal sounds. Then, a cough. Not a polite clearing of the throat, but a raw, chesty hack that speaks of damp air and lungs that have known too much wood smoke, a sound that seems to echo slightly off the packed earth floor. Another follows from a different corner, a dry, rasping sound that catches in the throat. It's a stark reminder of how quickly illness could spread in such confined spaces, how little comfort there was for the sick beyond a shared, meager warmth. These sounds are the baseline, the constant, almost imperceptible hum beneath the deeper quiet of the night. And then there are the animals, your family's precious, noisy assets, sharing this single room for warmth and security, theirs and yours. You might hear the soft snuffles and gentle grunts of the pig, tucked away in its designated corner, its wet nose exploring the straw. The occasional sleepy cluck and rustle of feathers might drift down from the chickens, perhaps roosting on a low beam above, shifting uncomfortably. A tethered goat might bleat softly in its sleep, or a cow, if the family is fortunate enough to own one, will shift its considerable weight with a sigh and the distinct rustle of disturbed bedding. There's no escaping this nocturnal orchestra. It's the sound of survival, a peculiar, communal breath shared in the dark. For them, perhaps, a strange comfort. For you, accustomed to your own quiet room, it would be a very, very long night indeed. And as those farmyard symphonies finally begin to lull you into a fitful doze, another, less comforting thought might begin to creep into your mind. Security. Or rather, the profound lack of it. Your front door, the main barrier between your slumbering family and the often unfriendly medieval night, is likely just a few rough-hewn planks of wood, perhaps warped and ill-fitting, with visible gaps that invite slivers of unsettling moonlight, and the persistent fingers of the chill night air. You might reach out in the dark, your fingers tracing the rough grain, feeling for the lock. This grand security feature would probably be a simple wooden bar dropped into two brackets, or maybe a leather thong looped over a peg. If you were particularly fortunate, a crude iron latch might offer a slightly more reassuring, though still easily overcome, click. There's no deadbolt, no security chain, no alarm system beyond the sudden squawk of a disturbed chicken or the bark of a distant village dog. Imagine lying there, hearing the wind sighing around the ill-fitting doorframe, each gust sounding like a whisper, each snap of a twig outside feeling unnervingly close. The forest, teeming with creatures and sometimes desperate men, isn't far away. A hungry wolf, its breath misting in the cold, drawn by the scent of livestock, or a less scrupulous neighbor, perhaps driven by hunger themselves, might find such a barrier little more than a polite suggestion. Peace of mind, as we understand it, was a luxury few peasants could afford. Their safety lay more in community, in the hope that no one would dare, rather than in any sturdy physical defense. A fragile hope, often tested. Beyond the thin walls and the shadowed tree line, another, more insidious threat lurked constantly, one that no amount of community, however tightly knit, could fully repel. This enemy wasn't a hungry wolf or a desperate outlaw. It was something far smaller, something that could slip unseen into your very breath. Imagine, if you will, the familiar tickle in your throat. A sneeze. The slight chill that signals the onset of what we now dismiss as a simple cold. A week of sniffles at most. But in your small, smoky hut, nestled amongst your family, this was no minor inconvenience. The air, already thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and unwashed bodies, offered little comfort to struggling lungs. There were no brightly colored syrups, no decongestants, certainly no life-saving antibiotics waiting on a shelf. Your cure might be a poultice of herbs, perhaps something pungent and vaguely medicinal, pressed to your chest by a worried family member, their touch a small comfort in the growing unease. Or perhaps a bitter brew, sipped slowly from a crude wooden cup, its warmth a fleeting solace against the encroaching chill. The fever, when it came, would feel like an unwelcome fire beneath your rough-spun, perhaps flea-bitten blanket. The world outside your small, unglazed window, with its endless cycle of back-breaking labor, would recede, replaced by a hazy, uncomfortable stupor. That initial tickle could easily become a rasp, a deep, chest-tearing cough that racked your already weary body. Soon, breathing itself might feel like dragging sharp stones through your chest. Pneumonia, bronchitis, names they wouldn't know, but outcomes they understood all too well. The line between a sniffle and a shroud was terrifyingly, heartbreakingly thin. And even if that fever broke, even if the breath returned to your lungs without that sharp, grating pain, your body would still sing a quiet, constant song of ache. Waking before the first hint of gray light wasn't a gentle rousing. It was more like being reluctantly pulled from a shallow, troubled sleep by the insistent demands of your own stiff limbs. Your bed, perhaps a thin straw pallet thrown over packed earth, or if you were fortunate, a slightly thicker one on rough wooden boards, offered no real solace. Instead, it might have been the very architect of that dull throb in your lower back, the crick in your neck that greeted you each morning like an unwelcome but entirely familiar old friend. Every movement, from the creak of your joints as you rose to your feet, to the first chores of the day, would be a negotiation with this ingrained discomfort. The endless stooping in the fields, tending to crops hour after hour, under a sun that could be both life-giving and utterly draining, would twist your spine into a premature curve. Lifting heavy buckets of water from the distant well, or bundles of firewood gathered from the sparse woods, would send jolts of protest through your shoulders and arms. Your knees, your hips, your hands, they would all bear the unyielding signature of relentless physical toil, a roadmap of daily survival etched into your very being. This constant landscape of discomfort wasn't something to be particularly remarked upon, not unless it became truly debilitating. A sharp twinge in the shoulder while scything the rough grasses, the grinding protest of a knee when kneeling on the cold, damp earth. These were simply the rhythms of a peasant's life. Chronic pain wasn't an affliction to be diagnosed and treated with gentle therapies. It was just the way things were. It was the baseline, the assumed state of being, as much a part of your world as the mud in winter or the buzzing flies in summer. You simply endured it, carrying these aches with you like an invisible heavy cloak, a constant, unremarkable companion on your daily trudge. But some pains weren't so easily carried, not so readily absorbed into the background hum of daily life. Consider, if you will, the relentless agony of a toothache. There was no friendly village dentist with a brightly lit surgery, no soothing gels or powerful painkillers to quiet the storm. Just the slow, insidious buildup of pressure, a dull throb transforming into a blinding, insistent rhythm that stole your sleep and soured your every waking moment. The air itself might seem to vibrate with your discomfort. Imagine that pain, a fiery spike driving deep into your jaw, making each mouthful of coarse bread an ordeal. The metallic tang of infection might eventually mingle with the taste of your meager food, a constant, unpleasant reminder of the decay within. Your options for relief were stark and unforgiving. Perhaps a poultice of questionable herbs, applied with a whispered prayer, or a charm muttered by the village elder. But when the tooth was truly beyond such gentle coaxing, when the swelling made your face a distorted mask, the cure was a brutal one. Your visit would not be to a sterile office, but perhaps to the local barber, his razors and tools also serving a more grim purpose, or even a blacksmith, whose strong hands and sturdy pliers were deemed fit for the task. There would be no anesthetic, no gentle numbing of the gums, only the cold, hard reality of unsterilized iron prying at the offending tooth. You'd feel the pressure, the sickening crack or wrench as it was forcibly evicted from its socket, a raw, bloody socket left behind. Such was the intimate, brutal dance with acute pain, another shard of daily existence to be endured, making you wonder how many quiet moments were overshadowed by that deep throbbing ache. That deep throbbing ache might eventually subside, a dull memory. But for the women of the household, a far more profound and perilous passage often awaited, the act of bringing new life into this harsh world. Imagine the scene, not in a pristine chamber, but within those same smoky, earth-floored walls we've wandered through. The air, already thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and unwashed bodies, would grow heavy with anticipation, and perhaps a quiet, pervasive fear. Here, in the dim light filtering through a small, unglazed window or the flickering glow of a tallow candle, a woman would endure her labor. She wouldn't be surrounded by medical professionals, but by village midwives. Older women whose knowledge was a tapestry woven from experience, herbal lore, and deeply held superstitions. Their hands, though perhaps calloused from a lifetime of toil, would not be scrubbed sterile. The water, likely drawn from the same well used for everything else, might be heated over the open hearth, but true hygiene as we understand it was a distant dream. Every contraction would be a battle fought in near darkness, every cry muffled by the thick, damp air. The risk of infection, of hemorrhage, of a baby unable to make its way, was immense. For both mother and child, this was a tightrope walk over a chasm of mortality. The joyous arrival of a new baby was so often shadowed by the grim possibility that the mother might not survive the ordeal, or that the child might draw only its first and last breaths within those very walls. It's a sobering thought, isn't it, how fragile that moment of creation truly was. And when illness or injury did strike, as it so often did in a world without our modern understanding of germs, where would you turn? The nearest town with a formally trained physician, if one even existed, was likely miles away, an arduous, perhaps impossible journey if you were burning with fever or weakened by blood loss. No, your immediate hope, your most accessible comfort, lay much closer to home, often with the village wise woman, or perhaps an elder, whose hands were stained with the earth and whose mind held generations of accumulated plant lore. Imagine stepping into their small, often smoky cottage. The air within would be thick, not just with wood smoke, but with the complex, layered scents of drying herbs, pungent yarrow for staunching wounds, willow bark for easing aches that settle deep in the bones, and the gentle perfume of chamomile to soothe a troubled stomach or frayed nerves. Bunches of these green and brown remedies would hang from the low rafters, rustling like dry leaves in the slightest draught, their earthy aromas a constant, almost tangible presence. They would listen to your woes, their gaze steady and assessing, before offering a poultice of carefully crushed leaves, a bitter tea brewed from gnarled roots, or perhaps a softly whispered charm as they tended to a wound. This wasn't the precise, sterile science we rely on today, of course. It was a rich tapestry woven from keen observation of the natural world, knowledge passed down through countless unwritten nights, a deep, almost instinctual connection to the turning of the seasons, and yes, a significant sprinkle of unwavering hope. Sometimes, almost miraculously, these remedies seemed to work wonders. Other times, they were simply a gentle hand, a comforting ritual, as nature took its often relentless, sometimes cruel course. The line between a true cure and a fortunate coincidence was often beautifully, tragically blurred, a quiet testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit and its desperate, whispered search for relief in a world that offered few certainties. And yet, for all that resilience, for all those whispered hopes pinned on herbs and ancient wisdom, the world beyond the healer's touch was filled with quiet, pervasive threats. The very air within a peasant's small, smoke-filled cottage hummed with a life unseen. It wasn't just the comforting scent of a simmering stew or the earthy aroma of damp clay walls. It was the constant, subtle presence of what we now understand as a microscopic battleground. A world where clean was a relative term, and often meant little more than sweeping dirt from one corner to another, or perhaps strewing fresh rushes that would soon enough harbor their own unseen dangers. Imagine you're there, in that dim, closed space, perhaps sharing it with your livestock on a cold night. You snag your hand on a rough wooden beam, a minor splinter, a scrape you'd barely think twice about today. But here, in this air thick with the breath of humans and animals, On a floor of trodden earth, where human and animal waste might not be far, that tiny wound is a gaping doorway. There's no antiseptic, no understanding that washing with truly clean water, if such a thing were even available, is crucial. Infection wasn't just a risk, it was an expectation, a shadow companion to every minor injury. The concept of invisible microbes waging war on the body was centuries away. Sickness was often attributed to a miasma, a noxious form of bad air, or perhaps an imbalance of the body's humors, not to tiny organisms passed from person to person, or festering in the very fabric of daily life. A shared drinking cup, a common blanket used by a feverish child, even a helping hand offered in kindness, could unintentionally pass along an ailment that might weaken, then claim, a life. The quiet cough from the next dwelling wasn't just a sound. It was a potential herald of shared suffering, a testament to how intimately and vulnerably these communities lived. This silent, constant siege by the unseen was perhaps the heaviest burden of all, a daily gamble played without knowing the rules of the game, where the stakes were always impossibly high. It was a world where survival often depended less on knowledge and more on sheer dumb luck. And this reliance on luck, this constant dance with chance, extended to the most mundane of injuries. Imagine for a moment you're tending the small, precious vegetable patch beside your wattle and daub home. The sun beats down, its heat relentless on your back. The earth dry and unforgiving beneath your worn leather turn shoes. Your hand, slick with sweat, slips on a rough wooden hoe handle. Or perhaps a jagged flint, half buried in the soil, gashes your palm. A small break in the skin, perhaps beading with a single bright droplet of blood. Today, you'd barely register it beyond a moment's sting, a quick rinse, a simple bandage. But here, in this world thick with unseen dangers, that little red line is a gaping doorway. There's no antiseptic spray, its cool hiss, a promise of cleanliness unknown, no sterile covering neatly wrapped in paper. Instead, perhaps a poultice of dubious herbs, ground with a stone still carrying yesterday's grime, or a smear of precious honey if you're fortunate, applied with fingers that have known no soap. You can only watch, with growing dread, as the angry, swollen redness creeps from that trivial wound like a malevolent tide. A sickly warmth blooms deep under the skin, then a relentless, throbbing ache that steals your sleep. The slightest touch becomes agony. Soon, a raging fever might take hold. Your body's desperate, overwhelmed attempt to fight an enemy it cannot see and you cannot comprehend. That simple cut, a moment's carelessness, now whispers of a slow, painful decline. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? How something so small, so easily dismissed in our time, could so readily unravel a life, turning a routine mishap into a final, fatal misstep. And it wasn't just the wounds you could see that posed a threat. Your home, that humble shelter, harbored its own unseen dangers, tiny companions you certainly didn't invite. Imagine the constant, maddening itch in your hair, under your rough-spun clothes. Lice, tiny tyrants, making their home upon your very skin. Fleas, too, would leap with irritating persistence from the straw bedding, from the packed earth floor, perhaps even from the family dog if you were fortunate enough to have one. Their bites, small, insistent red welts, would be a constant, unwelcome tapestry upon your skin. Then, as darkness settled, you'd hear them, the soft, furtive skittering in the walls, the rustle in the thatch above. Rats, bold and numerous, sharing your meager food stores and, far more insidiously, sharing their diseases. These creatures weren't merely annoyances, the stuff of mild revulsion we might feel today. Each flea bite, each louse, each rat scurrying unseen in the dim light, was a potential vessel. They were the unseen passengers, carrying with them sicknesses that had no name you'd recognize, no understood cause. A sudden, consuming fever, a strange and painful rash, a swift, inexplicable decline, perhaps attributed to bad humors, a vengeful spirit, or the will of a distant, inscrutable god. The true, tiny culprits, these unwelcome housemates, operated in stealth, their deadly role in spreading afflictions like typhus, or the dreaded plague itself, utterly beyond comprehension. Living with them was an accepted, unavoidable part of daily existence. An endless, itchy, unsettling coexistence that gnawed not just at your comfort, but at your very chances of survival. And so, these countless, infinitesimal architects of suffering, the real agents behind so much medieval misery, continued their silent, devastating work, entirely unblamed, completely unsuspected. You see, the very notion of a germ, a microscopic life form waging war within your own body, was an idea still centuries from dawning. It wasn't merely unknown. It was, in a very real sense, unimaginable within the framework of their world. Illness, when it inevitably struck with its chilling fevers and draining weakness, was a profound mystery, one to be deciphered through an entirely different and often misleading lens. Perhaps the village healer, or a traveling barber surgeon if you were near a town, would speak solemnly of your humors. These were the body's four vital fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, believed to govern not just your physical health, but your very temperament. An imbalance, too much fiery blood or an excess of melancholic black bile, and your internal harmony was shattered. The proposed remedies could be as frightening as the sickness itself. Letting blood to reduce a supposed surplus, or administering harsh emetics and purgatives, all in a desperate, often detrimental bid to restore a delicate, poorly understood equilibrium. Then there was the ever-present dread of bad air, the miasma. Imagine the constant, cloying scent of damp earth, human waste, decaying scraps of food, and unwashed bodies, all mingling into a thick, almost palpable atmosphere within the confines of your small home. This pervasive odor wasn't just an assault on the senses. It was widely believed to be the sickness, a poisonous exhalation rising from the world's accumulated filth. You might burn strong-smelling herbs or even carry a posy of flowers to your nose, small, fragrant shields against an enemy whose true nature remained profoundly misunderstood. And hovering over all these explanations was the immense, often terrifying power of divine will, interpreting illness as a test of faith, a righteous punishment, or an inscrutable act of God, leaving precious little recourse beyond prayer and a fragile hope for mercy in a world teeming with invisible, unnameable threats. And this sense of vulnerability, this deep reliance on forces far beyond your grasp, extended far beyond the specter of illness. It was woven into the very fabric of daily existence. Imagine, if you will, the immense psychological weight of it all. Not a sudden crisis, but a constant low thrum of uncertainty, a quiet knowledge that your life, your meager comforts, even your very survival, often hinged on factors utterly outside your influence. The sky itself could be your benefactor or your tormentor. A drought might parch your precious crops to dust, the sun beating down mercilessly on your already aching back. Or relentless rains could turn your fields into a sodden, hopeless morass, the promise of harvest rotting before your eyes. The local lord, a figure perhaps rarely seen but whose power was absolute, could demand more, levy new taxes, or call men away to distant, incomprehensible wars, leaving families to struggle and grieve. There was no recourse, no appeal to a higher, earthly authority that truly cared for your individual plight. Then there was the quiet, persistent ache of loss. In a world without modern medicine, without even a clear understanding of hygiene, life was breathtakingly fragile. The cry of a newborn was a precious, precarious sound, and the silence that followed too often was a familiar sorrow. Friends, family, neighbors, they could be vibrant and present one season and gone the next, swept away by sickness, accident, or the simple, brutal calculus of medieval life. This wasn't just occasional grief. It was an ambient condition, a backdrop to every toil and every fleeting joy. How did one carry such a burden? Perhaps through a stoicism born of necessity, a faith that promised meaning beyond the immediate suffering, or simply the relentless, day-to-day rhythm of survival that left little room for prolonged despair. But the toll, unseen and unrecorded, must have been profound. shaping a worldview where control was a fleeting dream and resilience the only true currency. And so, before that relentless rhythm of survival truly began, before the first axe fell or the first weary foot pressed into the cold earth, there was something else, something almost unimaginable to our modern ears, a profound, enveloping quiet. Imagine yourself there, stirring on a straw pallet in the pre-dawn gloom. No distant roar of traffic, no hum of a refrigerator, no glowing phone screen piercing the darkness. Just stillness. The air itself would feel different. Cool, certainly, perhaps carrying the damp scent of the earth floor beneath you, mingled with the lingering smokiness from last night's fire. A fire long since reduced to cold ash. The darkness, too, would be deeper, less diluted by ambient city light, broken only by the faintest hint of gray if dawn was truly imminent, or the glow of dying embers if the fire had been banked exceptionally well. You might hear the soft rustle of another family member stirring nearby, a sigh, the almost inaudible whisper of straw. Outside, perhaps the first tentative chirp of a brave bird, or the low, mournful call of a cow awaiting milking. But these would be isolated notes in a vast symphony of silence. A silence so deep it would feel like a physical presence, a heavy blanket settling over the world before the sun even thought to crack the horizon. This wasn't the curated quiet of a meditation app. It was the raw, untamed silence of a world without constant mechanical clamor. A quiet that might allow thoughts to settle, or perhaps more likely, a quiet that simply was, unremarked upon, the natural state before the inevitable cacophony of human and animal labor began to fill the day. It's a stillness that we, with our ever-present soundscape, might find unsettling, even deafening in its own way. A stark reminder of a world operating on an entirely different auditory wavelength. A silence that spoke not of emptiness, but of a world simply waiting. And as that world waited, it waited above all for the sun. Light, you see, wasn't just a convenience. It was a currency, more precious than any coin for the daily rhythm of life. Every task, from mending tools to tending the smallest patch of herbs, had to be squeezed into the golden hours gifted by the sun. Imagine your entire working day, your ability to see the world around you, shrinking and expanding with the seasons, a relentless natural clock. Dot. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, painting it in hues of gray and deepening purple, a different kind of quiet would descend. This wasn't just the absence of work noise. It was the enveloping presence of true, deep darkness. Inside your small, smoky hut, the fire might offer a flickering orange glow, casting more shadows than it dispelled. Perhaps a single, sputtering tallow candle, or more likely, a humble rushlight dipped in hoarded animal fat, would try its best to push back the gloom, its faint light revealing only a tiny circle of your world, the rest lost to the inky black. The evenings, especially in the long, unforgiving winter, stretched out, vast and unlit. What did you do in those hours? Huddle for warmth, tell stories perhaps in hushed tones, the tales punctuated by the crackle of the hearth, or simply sit in the near blackness, the world outside reduced to indistinct sounds and the biting cold seeping through the wattle and daub. It's a profound level of darkness we rarely experience, a darkness that dictated not just activity but perhaps even thought itself, a heavy blanket over the world until the first faint blush of dawn promised a return to light, and with it, life. And as that pale light finally creeps into your small dwelling, it illuminates a world defined not just by its dimness, but by its profound, unyielding texture. Imagine, for a moment, reaching out from beneath your coverings. The blanket pulled around you isn't soft, comforting fleece. It's more likely coarse wool, heavy and perhaps a little damp from the chilled air, carrying the faint, earthy scent of lanolin and wood smoke. Every fiber would feel distinct under your fingertips, a far cry from the smooth, comforting fabrics we surround ourselves with today. Your clothes, when you pull them on, would offer little respite. A simple tunic of rough-spun linen or perhaps wool, stiff and unyielding against your skin, especially before countless washings, and who knew when that might happen. There are no soft cottons here, no silky synthetics to glide against you. Each movement, however small, would be accompanied by a subtle, persistent friction, a constant, intimate reminder of the raw, unprocessed materials from which your meager possessions are made. It's a sensation we've largely engineered out of existence. Even the very walls of your hut, if you were to trace their surface in the growing light, would feel abrasive. Wattle and daub, a pragmatic mixture of mud, animal dung, and straw packed between wooden uprights, would be uneven, gritty, perhaps flaking slightly to the touch, and cold. The few tools you possess, a wooden bowl or a simple knife, would bear the honest, unadorned marks of their creation. No smooth, polished surfaces, no ergonomic design. Just the unvarnished reality of roughly worked wood grain. The cold, slightly pitted surface of hammered iron. It's a tactile landscape almost alien to us. A constant, low-level abrasion that would be, for modern hands and modern skin, a very real and wearing challenge from the moment you awoke. And as you navigate this rough-hewn existence, another fundamental difference would assert itself, one far less tangible but just as pervasive. The very rhythm of your day, the way you understand its passing, would be utterly alien to our clock-bound lives. There's no insistent ticking in the corner of your small, dim hut, no glowing numbers to consult on a device. Forget your smartphone alarms or your wristwatch. Time, for you, isn't measured in neat, equal minutes or regimented hours. Instead, your primary clock is the sun itself, a vast, silent timekeeper wheeling across the heavens. You'd watch its slow, majestic arc, a luminous guide charting the day's progress. Its first pale rays slanting through the single, unglazed window, or perhaps just through the numerous gaps in the wattle and daub walls, would be your wake-up call. This isn't a jarring alarm, but a gentle, insistent pressure of light, gradually nudging you from sleep. The shifting patterns of light and shadow on the beaten earth floor, the way the sunbeam creeps from one wall to another, would tell you when midday approached, when the brief pause for a meager crust of bread might be taken. The long, slow fade of that light, the deepening blue of the twilight sky, would signal the end of toil, the coming of a profound, enveloping darkness. Then there are the church bells. Their sound, perhaps a little hollow, a little melancholic, would drift across the fields from the distant stone church, carried on the breeze. These chimes punctuate the day, not with the relentless precision of the hour, but with calls to prayer, matins, lauds, vespers. They are sacred markers in a day, governed more by devotion and the pressing needs of the land than by abstract, numbered segments. These sounds, faint or clear depending on the wind, would be one of the few universal time signals, a shared, almost subconscious rhythm for the scattered community. Ultimately, your life would be tethered to the grand, unhurried cycles of the agricultural year, the earthy scent of thawing ground signaling the urgency of planting in spring, the relentless sun beating down during the long, hot days of summer harvest, the quiet anxiety of preparations for the lean, cold winter months. These were the true masters of your schedule. Time wasn't something to be saved or spent in the modern sense. It was something to be endured, worked through, and lived within, as vast and often as indifferent as the sky above your head. And in those rare moments when the day's back-breaking labor was done, or when the biting winter winds kept everyone huddled indoors, what filled the quiet? To our modern sensibilities, accustomed to an endless stream of digital diversions, the stillness might feel profound, almost unnerving. There were no glowing rectangles to swipe, no personal sound bubbles to retreat into. The concept itself would have been utterly alien. Instead, amusement was a shared warmth, a communal spark. Picture, if you will, the dim interior of a humble dwelling as dusk settles. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and perhaps damp wool, is lit only by the flickering amber glow of the central hearth. Shadows writhe and stretch across the rough-hewn timber and daubed walls, creating a theater of their own, a silent overture to the evening's shared experiences. It was here, in this intimate, smoky space, that entertainment came alive. Perhaps an elder, their voice raspy with age and wisdom, would weave tales. Stories of brave knights and mischievous sprites, or cautionary accounts of local folklore, each word savored by the listeners. Or maybe a neighbor with a knack for melody would lead a song, a simple, yearning ballad, or a surprisingly cheerful ditty, the tunes passed down like precious heirlooms, sung in unison by voices familiar and comforting in the close darkness. Beyond the hearth, simple games offered diversion. A few smooth stones or carved wooden pieces on a roughly scratched board, or dice made from knuckle bones, clattering softly on an uneven surface. And then, punctuating the year, were the religious festivals and holy days. These were the true spectacles, a chance for the whole village to gather, to share what little surplus they had, perhaps to witness a traveling mummers play, or simply to revel in a brief, sanctioned break from the relentless grind. Amusement wasn't a solitary pursuit. It was a thread woven through the community, a shared experience in a world that demanded togetherness. As the meager light of day finally surrenders to the encroaching darkness, and the shared laughter from those brief amusements fades, a different kind of togetherness settles over the peasant home. The air, already thick with the lingering scent of wood smoke and perhaps the faint earthy aroma of boiled root vegetables, grows colder, seeping through the ill-fitting door. Preparing for bed is not a lengthy affair, no luxurious rituals here. It's a starkly practical, almost primal transition from the day's toil to the night's uncertain rest. Your main concern, your absolute priority as the last light fails, is the fire. This flickering heart of your one-room world has provided dim illumination and cooked your sparse meal. Now it must be carefully banked. With a practiced hand, you'd rake the glowing embers into a tight, watchful cluster, then gently smother them with a layer of fine gray ash. This wasn't just about conserving fuel. It was a vital ritual, a slow-burning promise of warmth against the deep, often biting night chill. To let it die out completely was to invite a truly miserable, shivering darkness and a far more arduous morning. Then, it's time to huddle. Forget private bedrooms, or even separate beds for most. The whole family, parents, children, perhaps even an elderly relative, would often share a single, rustling, straw-filled mattress laid upon the cold-packed earth, or, if you were slightly more prosperous, a low wooden frame. You'd press close, a tangle of limbs seeking solace, bodies sharing what little warmth they possessed. A rough, scratchy woolen blanket, if you owned one, or perhaps just the clothes you'd worn all day, served as your only shield against the creeping cold. The sounds would be the soft hiss and occasional pop from the banked fire, the wind sighing, sometimes moaning, through unseen gaps in the wattle and daub walls, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of your loved ones beside you. A small, fragile human island in the vast, cold, and often silent night. Those were the sounds of your small, shared world. But beyond those thin, woven walls, the night held dominion with an entirely different symphony, one played in a key of profound, Stygian blackness. Imagine a darkness so complete, so absolute, it felt like a physical weight pressing in. No gentle orange glow from a distant town, no reassuring pinpricks of starlight often obscured by cloud or the dense forest canopy. Just nothingness. A velvety void where the familiar world simply ceased to exist outside your fragile shelter. And into this immense silence the other sounds would bleed, each one amplified by the quiet within your hut. The rustle of leaves just outside. Was it merely the wind sighing through the trees, or something moving with a quiet, deliberate intent? The sudden, sharp snap of a twig in the nearby woods could jolt you from the very edge of sleep. Was it a foraging animal, a fox perhaps, or something larger, hungrier, its presence felt even if unseen? A distant bark, easily dismissed by day, might transform at night. Was it truly a dog, or was it a howl, carried on the cold air, hinting at wildness too close for comfort? The mind, unlit and anxious, would race to fill in these blanks, often with the most unsettling possibilities. Even the familiar rustling in the thatch above your head, likely just mice or roosting birds, could in these long, dark moments sound like claws scrabbling, seeking entry. This wasn't merely fear of the dark as a child might know it, a fear of imagined monsters. This was a deeply ingrained practical understanding that the night was not truly empty. It was alive, and not always with friendly intentions. That profound darkness was a curtain, and you could only guess, with a shiver that had little to do with the cold, what might be stirring just behind it. But then, inevitably, the gray light of dawn would begin to seep through the cracks in the shutters or the open doorway. A weak, hesitant light, not quite dispelling the gloom, but rather diluting it into a new shade of weariness. There was no sudden burst of energy with the sunrise, no joyful awakening. Instead, it was a slow, aching return to consciousness, your body stiff from the hard floor or the thin straw pallet, the air still carrying the stale scent of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and perhaps the faint lingering smell of yesterday's meager pottage. This awakening wasn't a prelude to new opportunities or exciting prospects. It was, more often than not, the signal for the exact same demanding routine to begin anew. The same backbreaking labor in the fields, the same gnawing hunger, the same chill seeping into your bones. Imagine facing that, not for a week or a month, but for a lifetime. The sheer, unyielding sameness of it all could crush the spirit, and for many, perhaps it did. Yet people endured. This is where a peculiar, almost stubborn blend of resignation and resilience must have taken root. Resignation, because what other choice was there? The world was, as it was, divinely ordained or simply unchangeable. To rail against it too fiercely was to invite only more suffering, but alongside that, or perhaps born from it, was a quiet resilience, a determination to simply keep going, to find small moments of solace, a shared laugh over watery ale, the warmth of a child's hand, the brief satisfaction of a completed task. It wasn't a grand, heroic resilience you might read about in tales of knights and kings. It was something quieter, more deeply ingrained, a testament to the human spirit's stubborn refusal to entirely give in, even when the odds were so overwhelmingly stacked. Day after weary day, they faced it all. One wonders, was it faith, habit, or a profound, unspoken understanding of survival that kept them moving, one foot in front of the other, towards another uncertain night? And so, as night finally descended, pulling a thick, often starless blanket over the huddled village, what solace could the mind find? In that single smoky room, bodies would settle onto meager bedding. Perhaps a thin pallet of straw, shared with several others, the air thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, wood smoke, and the damp earth floor. A persistent draft would snake its way through the ill-fitting door, or the unglazed window slit, a constant reminder of the world outside and its many discomforts. Imagine, if you will, trying to drift into sleep like that. The symphony of the night would be one of human sounds. The soft breathing of children, the occasional cough, a muttered word from a restless sleeper nearby. Forget feather pillows and silken sheets. Your reality was closer to a shared human nest, warmth sought through proximity, not any semblance of individual comfort. The rough texture of the straw, perhaps a stray twig, would press into your side, a small, insistent detail in the larger tapestry of weariness. What, then, did they dream of, these weary souls, huddled together against the encroaching chill? Did their sleeping minds conjure feasts of roasted meats and endless flagons of ale, a stark, vibrant contrast to the thin gruel of their waking hours? Or were their dreams more troubled, shadowed by the very real fears that haunted their days? A failed crop, a harsh winter, the loss of a precious animal, or the ever-present threat of sickness for which there was no real cure. Perhaps for some, dreams were a blank canvas, a brief, blessed oblivion from the relentless demands of their existence, forgotten as soon as the gray light of dawn crept in. It's a quiet thought to ponder, isn't it? The dreams of those who had so little, yet lived so much, their inner worlds as unknown to us now as the precise pattern of the frost on their humble roofs, or the specific anxieties that tightened a chest in the deep, silent hours before another laborious day began. As those silent hours deepen, imagine the small, central hearth, once the heart of your one-room dwelling, now surrendering its warmth. The cheerful crackle and spit of the evening fire has long since hushed, replaced by the soft, almost mournful sigh of dying embers, a pinprick of orange in the encroaching dark. You huddle closer with your family, a tangle of limbs under rough, homespun blankets, perhaps a scratchy woolen cloak if you're fortunate, shared between several bodies. But the warmth they offer is a fleeting comfort, a temporary truce with the night. Slowly, inexorably, you feel the cold begin its nightly reclamation. It seeps in through the daubed walls, thin barriers against the vast, uncaring darkness outside. It creeps up from the packed earth floor, a damp, insistent chill that settles deep in your bones, making joints ache with a familiar throb. The dying glow of the fire casts long, dancing shadows, distorting familiar shapes into something momentarily unsettling. There's no double glazing here, no thermostat to nudge, just the relentless creeping cold, a constant, unwelcome companion through the darkest hours. Each breath you exhale might cloud faintly in the dim light, a visible reminder of the temperature's steady, unwelcome decline. The air itself feels thin, sharp in your lungs, carrying perhaps the distant howl of a dog, or the rustle of some unseen creature in the thatch above. Sleep, when it finally comes, is often shallow, punctuated by shivers, by the unconscious instinct to burrow deeper, to steal a little warmth from the sleeping form pressed beside you. The night is not a promise of uninterrupted rest, but a long, cold vigil, endured more than enjoyed as you wait for the first faint suggestion of dawn, the signal that the precious fire can, with care, be coaxed back to life, pushing back the shadows for just a little while longer. As the gray light seeps into the hut, bringing not so much cheer as a weary continuation. The fire, once coaxed back, offers a small circle of smoky warmth, but it cannot dispel the bone-deep chill that has settled in your joints overnight. Nor can it fully mask the tapestry of smells that now bloom with the new day. The damp earth floor, the lingering scent of stale sweat and unwashed wool, the byre if animals are close, and underlying it all, the ever-present wood smoke that catches in your throat and stings your eyes. There is no quiet corner to retreat to. The single room, perhaps shared with several generations and the occasional curious chicken, hums with the low thrum of other lives. Every rustle, every cough, every muttered word is public. Your very breath feels shared, not your own. This isn't the companionable buzz of a chosen community, but an enforced, inescapable proximity, where the boundaries of self begin to fray at the edges. And beneath this surface layer of tangible discomfort, a deeper unease begins to coil. The constant, low-grade awareness of things you cannot control, the damp that seeps into everything, the persistent itch you can't quite place, the precariousness of warmth and food. Each sensation, each pervasive smell, each intrusion upon your senses is a tiny pinprick. Alone, perhaps manageable, a fleeting annoyance, but together they form a relentless tide, slowly, surely rising. For a mind accustomed to quiet solitude, to clean air, to the simple luxury of a door that closes and a space to call one's own, this gentle, unending assault on the senses would begin to wear. This complete absence of personal space or predictable comfort, the sheer, grinding accumulation of these unfamiliar hardships, would gently but firmly overwhelm. Not with a sudden snap, but with a slow, creeping fatigue. The day is not yet half done, perhaps, but the mind already yearns for an escape that simply does not exist here. A quiet sigh against the relentless press of this life, a profound longing for a peace that feels centuries away. Thank you for joining us on PlotFall. Until our next story, may your thoughts be calm and your rest deep.